Andrew Hogarth is a native of Scotland, long-time resident of Australia and a world traveller. Hogarth's interest in Native American culture was ignited early in his youth and has led him to travel some 200,000 miles throughout the Great Plains and southwest of the United States of America over a 32-year period. Hogarth has visited with and photographed many people and places from the ordinary to the extraordinary and learnt much from the life and history of the people as well as the beauty and often harsh reality of the landscape. Hogarth's extensive fieldwork has resulted in 3 photographic collections and the publication of 6 books. Now, in Native America, Dinetah to the Greasy Grass, 2008 to 2013, is an exhibition that's part of the 2014 Healing Arts program. A percentage of sales are returned to the program for the procurement of new work and the ongoing maintenance of art within St. Vincent's public spaces. And Andrew joins us here in the studio today to tell us a little bit, a snapshot of what the extensive period of over 30 years of work and particularly the exhibition that's on at the hospital. Andrew, thanks for joining us in the studio.
Thank you, Angela. It's nice to be here.
Well, it's wonderful that you can join us. There's a lot to talk about and it's pretty difficult to sort of talk about where to begin. But let's start with the exhibition that's currently showing at St. Vincent's Hospital in public spaces. Tell us about the Native America, the Greasy Grass. I want to hear about the Greasy Grass. Tell us about this particular selection of works.
Before we start, I'd just like to say that the Healing Arts program at St. Vincent's it's been going a decade now, and they don't have any budget, and they basically don't have really any full-time staff. It's volunteers and people that have an interest in art that have actually managed to sort of pull together, and they have one of the most robust art spaces in Sydney. They're running 2 floors, 2 exhibitions a month and 24 exhibitions annually, and the 20% they get from sales actually goes to buy art, as you mentioned earlier, to be installed inside the public hospital for patients, doctors, people coming in for tests. And it's amazing, when this exhibition, Native America, Dinetah, the Greasy Grass, went up last Friday, and the exhibition downstairs is by a lady called Lucy Rose, who's from the Snowy River Mountains, and she's painted horses with Australian cowboys with their leather coats and hats on. And then I have my Native American images upstairs. And as they change every month, you could see that when people were coming back to work last week, when the exhibitions went up on both floors, you could feel the buzz that it just actually gives people a lift. And that's what the Healing Arts program's there to do, is basically change the dynamics of the wall art for people that are passing, and actually, you know, and for patients, long-term patients, it's a must that when they're actually starting to get mobile and can move around, that they can actually go and find new things to look at and things that help them and inspire them and help them on their journey as they actually start to heal before they go back into society.
It's amazing to actually see that happen in front of you. It's a wonderful idea. It's a wonderful concept, and it is happening at the St. Vincent's Hospital, and you're part of it as part of this selection exhibition from works from 2008 to 2013. It is about community, and all of your work centres around community, and obviously this is an important one where it's being exhibited at the moment. But tell us a little bit about the community within which you've extensively travelled. I mean, there's a great physicality of body of work, but there's also a physicality of landmass as well. Now, let's talk about this exhibition, though, the Dinetah to the Greasy Grass. Tell us about that particular selection.
It's, I think you'd have to go back to 1981. I was one of the refugees that managed to escape the United Kingdom when Margaret Thatcher was wielding her sword. There was 2 million people over a space of a 12-month period that basically were made unemployed. I lost my home. I owned it outright at the time, but I couldn't pay my council rate, so I was going to get evicted anyway. So I just packed a suitcase, sold the place to the first person for rock bottom price, and I'd been in Australia a couple of times prior to that, and I just decided, said to my family that I'm going to get on an airplane and I'm going to head back to a place that I knew that I would get employment, and a place that I was familiar with from earlier stays. And as I was coming back, I travelled across America, Trek America, and I picked up a couple of books of old full-bloods, Black Elk Speaks, Lame Deer Seeker of Visions. And these books just ignited something inside me, and I started travelling, and then I met Jack Little, an old Sioux, and 3 years later, in 1985, I published his life story, and I just kept working on. I kept visiting battlefields, Canadian border, down to the Texas Panhandle. I found it really exciting to find a rock where blood had been spilt. To me, it's sort of, photographic-wise, it was never going to, be something that, you would put in a frame and put on a wall, but in book format, there was people out there that were interested in seeing the imagery, what happened in the latter half of the 19th century when the Sioux and the Cheyenne, the Comanche, Kiowa actually fought to try and preserve their culture and their way of life, because this was the end game since Columbus had came. So the survivors today, when I moved into the contemporary area with powwow, and the people today, after I'd worked with the old elders and the battlefields, they were interesting because that imagery just shows the art and shows and to go to a powwow and actually to hear the drums beat, and to see at the Crow Fair, to have 10,000 Native Americans with 1,000 teepees, and there might only be maybe 100-200 white people moving around, friends and people that have came along. So it's quite an intimidating atmosphere and place to be in. When you work in the areas with Indigenous people, it's more it's not about having that bag of cash in front of you and say, look at me, how good am I? It's just about, and my philosophy has always been about, life's all about politeness, good manners and awareness of others, then the money. And of course it's a necessity to have it, but it's just that balance that you have to find within yourself and with your life. And I just get inspired when I photograph and the images hanging at the hospital to see the feathered bustles and the beadwork and the hide work. And to me, it's important that I photograph imagery like that because it's inspirational that individuals are still out there and will spend that time.
Part of a CD that you've produced by happen perchance meeting with Chris Fisher, a young guy, a young musician of the age of 19 years of age, I believe, at the time. And you produced this album over a collective period of time that actually reveals some of these stories within the lyrics that you wrote.
Yeah, it's always nice when you have main areas that really inspire you and things you come across along the way. And when I was doing the Battlefields book in it was 2 battlefields because it was a gradual build-up of finding sites and then eventually getting to a point where I'd want to publish. But in 1990, I found a site, a massacre of Cheyenne in Kansas, and it was quite a prominent engagement. And there was a lot of women and children massacred, and there was nothing in history apart from about 12 lines in a university publication, and it was all pro-white. So I actually worked with John Sipes, who was a tribal historian in Oklahoma, and this gentleman was just he had 25 file cabinets at campsites and Sundance sites. He'd spent his whole life doing it. So it was terrific, to actually work with John, and we eventually wrote a booklet, and it was well received, and it was actually published by local people in Kansas. And then when I met young Chris Fisher at the post office after the national tour had been developed and was on its way in America, he asked me for a reference, and I said, well, write me a song in the booklet. So we did Sweet Medicine, and I researched them for the lyrics. So eventually it just snowballed, and we did 2 songs, and then 2 songs became 9, and then eventually after 18 months 9 became 11. And I ended up writing, and it was always my ideas, and I had to research him, so I started writing all the main features in the areas that I'd worked in the history. Sitting Bull and obviously Crazy Horse were always 2 main characters that really inspired me as freedom fighters. And to actually have both of them on the same CD at the end of the day, I think their age groups, Sitting Bull was in his 40s and Crazy Horse was only in his early 30s, so there was a difference of about 12 years, and both of them had the same cause to turn the white man back, and they wouldn't allow anything to come between that. And eventually both of them were brutally murdered by the American government because they were, even in captivity, they were both still threats, which was sad. But the songs are tremendous. I'm very proud of them. Although my work really is the book work and the photography, it was so nice to come across someone who was, he was 30 years younger than me.
You're pretty good with the numbers and the math there. I'm speaking to the very talented, committed and purely wonderful Andrew Hogarth. He's a photographer, and he's single-handedly managed to cover 200,000 miles throughout the Great Plains and southwest of the United States of America over a 32-year period, covering the Native American culture and the people that are within that massive landmass, the indigenous peoples indeed of America. We're going to take a little insight look into Sitting Bull. Perhaps you can introduce us.
Yes, I always used to think that when you're travelling the distances, it's always a pleasure to know that there's maybe someone looking over your shoulder helping you along the way, because there was definitely more than once that we had problems. But Sitting Bull was always there, up there, so helping me point the way.
Riches await the open-hearted. Riches await the open-hearted. Lady love, the ghost dance would rekindle his youthful rage as his people suffered reservation. Life he would not stand still. With the gasp of a dying breath, the metal breasts took his life. A great man is born, not made, from the cradle to the grave. His spirit and soul still roam the valleys of his homeland. The northwind carries words for all to hear. Riches await the open-hearted. Riches await the open-hearted. His spirit and soul still roam the valleys of his homelands. The northwind carries words for all to hear. Riches await the open-hearted. Riches await the open-hearted.
That's Sitting Bull, produced by the man who's sitting in the studio with me, by Andrew Hogarth, and also Chris Fisher, who's singing on that track, and lyrics written by you, Andrew. Look, there's still much to talk through, including I'd like to find out a little bit more about the journey, the physical journey and the meeting of some of these communities. It must have been not an easy thing, actually, just sort of being kind of rocking up and then sort of announcing yourself and then just sort of spending time. It must have been sort of like a transitional period for you.
I think when I grew up in a house and estate in Edinburgh, Scotland, I think I was always conscious of the fact that, life wasn't easy. Lots of alcohol, much like the Indian reservations, not a lot of employment, not a lot of hope and things to look forward to going forward. And basically these housing estates were on the outskirts of Edinburgh, so they were far away from all the nice hotels, all the nice homes and things like that. So it was, at the say, out of sight, out of mind. And some of the reservations are like that. Some aren't. Navajo, they've got a lot of wealth. When people visit my exhibitions and see the contemporary people in the regalia, they always say, do they live in teepees? I always say no. A lot of them actually live in apartments. A lot of them actually have lifts, and some of them live on the 19th floor. Because there's that stereotype, much like a Scotsman, does he wear a kilt? Does he go to work with a kilt on? And I always say no, we go to work with jeans or trousers on, and we do kilt things in ceremonies. And I think I have all these things in place as a tribal person from the past with my own culture. So I was very sensitive to that. But also I wasn't prepared to take any bullshit, even though I was surrounded by native people in a lot of areas. But I always liked my concept was always that it was like a highway with the two yellow lines in the middle. I always liked to meet the person in the middle and shake hands in the yellow lines. So very rarely would I actually go onto their areas because I was too respectful for that. So when there was things like powwows and people that lived off reservation and people that were pushing theirself forward into the white man's world, they were the people I would meet, because basically they were the progressive people, and people like Jack Little, and people I met with the historians. And a lot of Americans do live in cities. Native Americans live in cities, and basically, you know, a lot of the reservations, they have their own police force, they have their own hospitals. Not everybody's just standing outside a shack with holes in their clothes and, you know, a mountain of garbage in front of them. I mean, that's not the side I want to promote. I want to promote the people that are going forward, and the people that actually, to show imagery that inspires you, the artistic efforts of these individuals.
Tell us a little bit about Crazy Horse, because you also you wrote a song about him.
Yeah, Sitting Bull was always the main guy that always used to inspire me. He just basically said, he's recorded in history, well, he did go to Canada after Little Bighorn. He stayed there 4 years and basically said, I'm not coming back. And he came back and he lived on a reservation until 1890, and just shortly before Wounded Knee, the massacre, he was murdered because it was all the governments had all conspired to basically say the end is nigh and this is it. But Crazy Horse was basically, when he came in after the Little Bighorn, he came in 12 months later, or, you know, 8 to 12 months. I think it was September 1877. He came in early September with 1,000 of his followers, men, women and warriors at Fort Robinson. But he only lived 5 months. The conspiracies and the talking, and it just basically everybody was vying for the white man's food and who was going to be accepted, Red Cloud, Spotted Tail. And Crazy Horse really just never fitted into that. And so it was all, people were basically talking, and eventually an incident happened. He was brought by his own people to Fort Robinson. Instead of speaking with the officer in charge, he was actually told he was going to go to the guardhouse. They were going to ship him off to Fort Marion in Florida. And he refused to go into the guardhouse. He basically threw up his arms and broke free. But there was actually an Irishman who was on guard duty that day. It's quite interesting that this gentleman was 40 years. I think his name was William Gentiles. I'm not too sure. He was standing there with his rifle and the bayonet fixed on the end, and he was actually never ever became anything other than just a private. He spent 40 years as a private, but this was the gentleman that actually lunged forward and actually stabbed Crazy Horse in the kidney in the back. And he was taken into the adjutant's office next door, and he died close to midnight with his best friend, the Chief Touch of Clouds, and his father. And that was the end of Crazy Horse. So he basically came in, I think, 10 months after the Little Bighorn. But he was a threat. He was a huge threat because he could unite people. And he died at a young age. I think he was only in his mid-30s. But he had fought the American government for 10 years, and a very powerful man. They called him the strange man of the Oglalas, because he used to leave camp and go away for long periods of time in the mountains and the hills. And people always said, "Where have you been? Where have you been?" And he said, "I've been thinking."
This is Crazy Horse from the album produced by Andrew Hogarth and Chris Fisher. You're listening to Eastside Radio.
Lies in natural but not social ties, an inspiration to some, but other fools would rather see him harmed. The clouds of jealousy blinded their eyes. die, breaking hearts. A good day to fight, a good day to die, breaking hearts. A good day to fight, a good day to die, breaking hearts.
And that was Crazy Horse. And it's kind of apt, actually, also because we're into the Chinese New Year, which is the year of the horse. Now, the significance of these kind of, symbols of animals and totems of sorts are quite an important aspect to a lot of Indigenous cultures. Did you get called a particular name, Andrew? I'm talking to Andrew Hogarth. He's a photographer, documenteur, a historian, amongst many other things, as well as storyteller. And you've just heard songwriter. Andrew, were you named or given a particular Native American name?
I think if I was given a name, that probably would have been the Mad Scotsman.
Well, we can probably label you with that quite easily enough.
I think when I did a lot of the contemporary photography from 1995 onwards, because as I say earlier, I was basically working with some of the old full-bloods and historians, John Sipes, Bill Tallbull, Jack Little, and so most of the 1995 onwards was basically contemporary stuff, the powwows. So I would only just go in quickly, and it would be limited contact. Some of these people I'm still friends with. Some of them are my best friends on Facebook. One gentleman, I shot an iconic picture of a Hunk Papa Sitting Bull's man, Jay Eagle. I allowed a painter, Denny Kashner, in Florida recently to paint it. And I don't allow people to paint my photographs. So the exhibition at St Vincent's is really unique in one way because it's 6 years of digital after finishing 30 years of film. And I still only use small cameras because I don't want to be intrusive and sort of make people feel uncomfortable. Because I actually put the cameras quite close up, and I love to capture really, larger than life portraiture. And so it's important that the equipment is basically good quality, but not making the individuals feel uncomfortable. So the images that are hanging up now, I'd really love to sell some and make some money for the program, for the Healing Arts program. It's important. They get 20% installation of the art, to buy new art for patients. We never know when we'll end up in there. I was in there last year. I had a renal tumour, and I was in St Vincent's, and I had that removed. And basically, I'm only in a year of recovery, and I made it out to New Mexico last August, very tentatively. But I shot some amazing images, which completed the 6-year digital collection. And I've actually priced them only half price or less than half price, 230 a copy, and the editions are only 25.
Native America, Dinetah to the Greasy Grass, 2008 to 2013, is the photographic exhibition at the Xavier Art Space in St Vincent's Hospital. Andrew Hogarth, there is such a great deal to talk about. 32 years of work, and we just get to have a snapshot of an exhibition, Native America, Dinetah to the Greasy Grass, and well worth a look. It's on till Thursday the 13th of February. It's been a pleasure having you here in the studio, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Angela.